Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Sara Jo Royalty. Sara Jo was recently featured in the summer issue of Fly Tire magazine. Please join us as Sara Jo shares her journey from commercial fisherman and musician to professional caddy and fly tire. I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a review on the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And now, a shout out to this episode's sponsor. This episode's brought to you by our friends at Bonefish and Tarpon Trust. Using a science-based approach, BTT and its partners work tirelessly to conserve and restore the flat species so many of us love to chase on the fly. On September 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern, BTT will virtually host its 9th annual NYC auction and award ceremony. You can attend this great event from the comfort of your home. Please visit btt.org to learn more, register, and support this great organization. Now, on to our interview. Well, Sara Jo, welcome to The Articulate Fly.
Thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to our conversation too. And we have a tradition on The Articulate Fly. We always ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
You know, my earliest fishing memory was I was about 4 years old, and I had a Snoopy rod. I like the Snoopy rod. The action's really good on that one, you know. My grandpa would take me out. We had a couple hundred acres of tobacco and soybean farms in Ohio, and every Saturday morning and Sunday morning when we were on the farm, he would wake everybody up, you know, at the butt crack of dawn and take us all fishing on our private pond. And it's funny because my mom told stories growing up about how she just absolutely hated that. And I, of course, loved it, which kind of drove her crazy because then as an adult, she was still going out there. But I remember, we put a worm on, threw it out, and I landed a pretty decent sized bass. I mean, especially for my size, I mean, the thing was probably 4 or 5 pounds. And I was hooked. That was it. I mean, I was out there as often as I could. As soon as I was old enough, I was there, you know, go down there on my own. And that's really what got me started.
Yeah, very neat. And I know earlier in your life, you spent quite a few years as a commercial fisherman off the North Carolina coast. How did you get from Ohio to Eastern North Carolina and get into the commercial fishing game?
You know, it was pretty roundabout. Grew up in the Midwest. When my mom got her doctorate, we had to move to Illinois. And that was during my high school time. And it was just, honestly, just the Midwest. Oh, God, it was so boring to me. I'd been to Carolinas for vacation annually with my family. And I graduated early, actually, when I was 17. So pretty much the day I turned 18, I rode out there. And it wasn't right away. It was probably a good year or almost 2 years of living on that coast before I started, probably a year. Funny enough, I saw the perfect storm. And I was like, aside from the bad storm in the movie, I'm really intrigued by this type of fishing. I think I might hate it, but the challenge, I really want to try it. So I basically, I got a job as an observer on a shark boat, we're long line for shark. There's a limit, so we'd only be out like 3 or 4 days at a time. And after the first trip, I was just so bored, you know, quote unquote, observing that I started helping out. And they really didn't need me as crew, so I wasn't making money, but I got a skill set to be able to work on other boats. And I basically just hung out on the dock until somebody got hard up for a deckhand. And after that first trip, they kept me. So I did that for on and off for 6 years, long lining for tuna and swordfish offshore. I did a little of that, and then I would switch seasonally and I ran a shrimp boat for a while, did mullet netting a little, did oystering and clamming and bottom fishing. So.
Yeah, very neat. What's speaking of the perfect storm, what's the craziest thing that happened to you while you were out in the water as a commercial fisherman?
You know, there was definitely a couple of incidents. The one that I remember the most, there was, this timing thing. The line is going out, and there's two people. One person has one side of the hook, and they have the hook and they're baiting it, and then the other person is snapping it on the line. And it doesn't stop if you're not ready. So like if you're just off your rhythm, that's when trouble can happen. And the guy who was baiting, I don't know what happened, but the hook went into his hand because he was off his rhythm. He wasn't done hooking. The line was going down. He went over. He was hooked and down underwater. We had to stop the line, reel him back in, and bring him in. He was okay, but it was pretty intense. Almost lost somebody, so it was pretty intense. That's the one thing. The other couple little things is there was one storm the waves were about 30 feet. And we were pretty much, at that point, you're bracing yourself in your bunk, like with your arms and your legs against trying to hold yourself in place. That was pretty crazy too.
Yeah, I'm afraid I get a little too seasick for 30-foot seas.
Yeah, it's a little intense.
Yeah. So when did you find the dark side of fly fishing?
It's funny because I will never stop kicking myself for this. It actually wasn't too long ago, but when I was a commercial fisherman in the Carolinas, a lot of times I would get hired by sport fishing boats to go do fish finding for like the Big Rock tournament and other fishing tournaments in the area. And I ended up meeting this guy through this network who was a saltwater fly fisherman for Patagonia. And he was like, Sara, you got to come with us. I just think you would love this. His name was Jacob. Jacob, if you're listening, I'm sorry. But he would be like, you got to come out with us. And I would shut him down. I'm like, no, I'm 20. I don't really have a ton of money. Like, I can't afford a several $1,000 hobby. Like, no. And he's like, I have the stuff. And I was just like, I can't, I know me. I'll spend I won't feed myself before I get a new rod and reel. Like, I know me. And he would try to get me. I know I came over to his shop one time because he was like, Sara, you got to come out this bench I have. I just think you would love tying. I wouldn't do it because I didn't see myself being able to invest in doing it. And I knew that I would like it too much. So I didn't touch it. And then when I moved out to the West Coast, I've been out here 12 years, but when I moved out, my kids were really young. So I wasn't doing any fishing at the time. So when they got a little older and I started to get back into it, I had a guy that I dated who was just, everything in his life was fly fishing, this and that. And I wouldn't say that he taught me, but he introduced me to it, and I watched him a lot. And I actually used to, he was real he just didn't really want me to touch any of his stuff. So he would leave to work and I would get on his vise and mess around with stuff. And then I would take a picture of the vise in the table and put it back exactly the way he had it. And one day when he came home, I had my own vise. He's like, what the heck's going on? I was like, so I might have borrowed yours a couple of times until I decided I wanted my own. And that was the start for me. That's probably only been about 5 years ago. Maybe not even that much. Probably a little less. But I would say after about 9 months of doing that, I went to my first fly fishing show and just as a visitor, and somehow they asked me if I tied. I said I did. They asked me to email them some pictures of flies, and I was in. Yeah, I started doing fly shows after that.
Yeah, very neat. And so you haven't been fly fishing that long. Who are some of the folks that mentored you, probably other than that boyfriend?
I don't it was such a weird experience because I didn't learn a lot from him, but he introduced me, and then I kind of, I did a lot on my own at first. I didn't understand the fly fishing world. I didn't understand the network, how it worked, until I started going to the shows. And then the people at the shows really took me in, like Dave McNeese, who does Blue Heron Hooks. He's been definitely a big influence for me, and a good friend, Marty Howard, who is an author about steelhead books. He's got a couple of them out. He He's another one that has mentored me. And honestly, they just really have encouraged me, a lot of these guys, because even my reps and stuff, I'm like, they're offering me sponsorship, and I'm like, you got this all wrong. Like, I'm new. I don't know what I'm doing. They're like, no, you'll be fine. We'll help you along. Like, you're great. We want you to do this. So they definitely encourage me a lot. And every time you go to a show, you learn a little trick from someone every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what's your favorite species to chase on the fly?
So far, I would say is steelhead. They're definitely really tough to catch, and they take a lot of time. But it's worth all that casting time. I think that just coming from commercial fishing and catching such large fish, that was one of the allures for fly fishing for me, because, after you're catching 100-pound fish, come back and catch a little trout, everybody's like, oh, that 18-inch trout, that's a great one. I'm like, that's ridiculous. I just had a hard time with the sizing issue, I think. So I like the tug on the steelhead. They're real playful. Summer steelhead over here on the North Umpqua will take a top water. So that's pretty exciting. But I'm not too biased, to be honest.
Yeah, very neat. And, in addition to being a commercial fly tyer, I also know you're an accomplished musician and you're a professional golf caddy. And I was really curious. Oh, you're laughing.
Yeah, I'm like, how did you find out about that?
Oh, it's in your...
about the music.
Oh, it's in your LinkedIn profile.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I never go on there.
Yeah. So no, I always do research before I do interviews. And so, and I really wanted to ask you about it too, because it was something that wasn't covered in the piece that Dave Klausmeyer did on you in Fly Tire.
Yeah. We didn't talk about it. I didn't think about it. He really kind of, other than the fishing, was like, I really want to talk about the golf course and the caddying, which I just kind of loved. I was like, I love that he wanted to talk about that, because that was one of my things. Like when I started doing Instagram, it's like TFO's like, hey, you got to get on social media. So, I've been trying to work on that. And I wasn't even sure how to approach that. I'm like, should I have a golf account for caddying and then a fishing account, or what should I do? And since I'm not, too social media savvy yet, I'm just more of a doer than let's get on and post and content. I do that stuff and I do enjoy it now a little bit, but it's just not my natural go-to. So I decided, you know what? A lot of people that golf, fish, and vice versa. I'm just going to combine the two and hope it works out. And it's worked out so far.
Well, cool. So, I found about your music career on LinkedIn. So tell me a little bit about it. Cause it sounds like, from the time you were a relatively young girl, you've been performing.
Yeah. I started playing classical piano when I was 3. And I took lessons till I was 15. And at that point, I don't know that lessons were even pertinent anymore. I honestly couldn't find a teacher after that. So practiced on my own. When I moved to the Carolinas, I started playing the guitar. Actually, I started singing with one of my best friends who lives in Maine. We've been best friends for over 20 years. And he was playing for me, and he was getting ready to go sailing to Norway. And I said, well, who's going to play for me? He said, well, you're going to have to figure out and play it for yourself. So I went and bought a guitar just because so I guess I should mention that in the Carolinas, I lived on a sailboat. So the sailboat does not accommodate a piano very well. So I learned the guitar. I started performing there. Since I kind of fished seasonally on and off, I would perform several times a week when I was not offshore. And I put out an album, and that was kind of it. I moved out to the West Coast thinking I would continue the music gig, and the area that I live in has virtually no live music, and they don't even want it. It's a little different now. It's a little better now for that, but at the time it just kind of killed the music career a little. And then somehow a couple years ago, people just keep knocking on my door asking me to do more. So I'm trying to juggle it a little. I've been doing a lot of studio stuff, writing and copywriting and recording new songs. So nothing I've released anytime recently. Plus this COVID deal, I don't feel like is a good time to be releasing a lot of music because I know there's no live concerts or anything going on. So I've kind of given that a little bit of a back burner, not to mention it's just kind of hard to juggle all three, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you do have a lot on your plate. Do I remember that you also know how to play the dulcimer?
Yeah, I actually play like the drums, the ukulele, bass guitar, guitar, dulcimer. When I was younger, I did play the dulcimer for quite a while. Also played, I've played a lot of instruments, the flute, the clarinet, the oboe, the violin, the cello. Typically, if you can play the piano very proficiently, you can pick up any instrument and learn it within a few hours. You know, not obviously great, but you can be proficient and start playing songs within a few hours.
Yeah, very neat. And you've had some really interesting music gigs. What's the one that stands out in your memory the most?
You know, my favorite is this, I was down at Daytona 500 for 4 or 5 years in a row as private entertainment for the drivers and owners, which was incredible because I get to watch all the races because I obviously am not playing for them while they're driving. They would get done off the racetrack and want to sit around a campfire and listen to live music, and that was me.
Yeah, very cool. How did you get that gig?
You know, I think it's just one of those things. You end up knowing somebody and they're like, hey, we like your stuff. We'd love some, it's just kind of fall into everything. I feel like that's how everything happens. I just happen to meet one guy and the next thing I know, I'm off at Daytona. Actually, I think that the commercial fishing was kind of how I got that job. I know that makes no sense, but
yeah, it's really neat. And I mean, so you were a commercial fisherman, you're an incredibly proficient musician, and you have this passion for caddying for golf. How did you get into the golf caddying gig?
The golf caddying gig, that was another knock on the door. When I was out in Oregon, when I first moved out here, our town's only 3,000 people, and we have this world-class golf resort. And the resort is so big at this point, it is employing or independently contracting upwards of 900 people. So most of the people I knew in town worked at the resort in some fashion or another. And I had about 20 to 30 caddy friends that I would hang out with doing various things, go to the beach, do whatever. But every single one of them at some point looked at me and said, why don't you caddy? And I was like, why would I do that? Why would I do that? I didn't understand the question because I didn't play golf. But what they were referring to is, the nature of me liking to work outdoors, doing physical work. They just thought it would be a perfect fit for me. And I didn't really give it a whole lot of thought until my kids, I was working in the evening so I could be at home with my young children during the day. But when they were ready to go into kindergarten and first grade, I realized that if I didn't change my job, I probably would never see them. Because I have actually worked in food and beverage on and off for 15 years. So at the time I was working in food and beverage in the evening. And I just decided, well, maybe I'll look into this caddying thing since, it's a daytime only thing. I need a daytime only gig. And so I read the PGA manual. I didn't even really start golfing then. I have golfed a couple times before that, but it was not a regular thing. I did not own clubs. So I started looking into it, started training, and ended up getting a job somehow. I kind of weaseled my way in, telling the caddy master that no one was going to outwork me, and that this ground doesn't even move. It's a walk in the park, and I work 18-hour days on the fishing boat. Like, go ahead and try me. And he just was like, all right. So I don't think he really wanted to give me the job, but I definitely tried to muscle my way in a little bit. And he liked the feistiness and gave me a chance. And I ended up excelling. I realized that I had a lot of the skills to be a caddy that I had gained from other industries, like just having a personality, getting along with being personable, and came from the hospitality industry. It's like I had already done food and beverage and had to work with people all the time. So that was really comfortable. And living on a sailboat, I realized I knew the wind better than all of the caddies that were already out there. So coming up with yardage ended up being I learned that pretty quickly and became accurate pretty quickly. And then putt reads, in school I studied music mainly for scholarship, but I also studied chemistry and biochemistry, and there's just a lot of geometry in that. So that's where that came in for green reading, is all the geometry. So it just kind of fell together, and the next thing I know, I'm doing this, and it's like I get to walk around in the park all day. I love it. So now I've it's kind of become a full-time, all around the country gig, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what's your home resort? And then I guess the related question is, are you caddying for specific golfers on the tour, or do you go to other events that aren't in your hometown to caddy? Tell us a little bit about that.
So yes, and yes to all of those. So I am at Bandon Dunes Golf Resort, which is, they kind of flip-flop number one spot with Pebble Beach, but, I would definitely consider it number one in the country for public links golf. It's incredible. It's right on the cliffs. You're literally walking along the cliffs every day. I mean, the property is a 3,000-acre property. We have 5 18-hole golf courses now and 2 par 3 courses. Our newest course, the Sheep Ranch, just opened up June of this year, and it is like absolutely incredible. I mean, you can't even describe it. So I am there the majority of the time. I own a home nearby, and my kids and I were here most of the year. Since I have been at Bandon Dunes for 8 years now, most of my work is request or return customers. I rarely take new jobs at this point because I tend to be pretty well booked out throughout the year. So, I think since we opened for COVID, I've really only met 3 or 4 new groups that I've been working the whole time. So at this point, I just work on referrals. And then, and we have the largest caddy program I know in the country, possibly in the world. There's 350 of us here. So it's a pretty big program. Most people take a caddy because it's walking only, and it's a good 8.5 mile hike on each course. So it's a decent hike. In January, I go down to the desert, kind of just a little work break, switch it up, and I caddy on the PGA Tour for the Pro-Am. So I do have some regular requests from people that play in the Pro-Am every year, and I carry specifically one girl. She actually won the Desert Classic. Well, they call it the Bob Hope Classic. That's how everybody knows it, in 2019. So I take her, and then the caddy master will schedule me to other players for the other Pro-Ams, at the Waste Management or over in San Diego. So I do hang out with the tour a little bit, usually just in January, unless I get a call. And then I also work at 3 private country clubs. They are Discovery Land properties. Discovery manages these properties, really incredible high-end private properties. I mean, the golf is just exceptional. Service is exceptional. One of those is the Madison Club. That is down in Palm Desert. That's where all of the PGA pros like to practice when they're down there. And then the sister course is up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. That's Gaza Ranch. And then the third one is in Las Vegas, called the Summit. So I just kind of hop around to keep it interesting. And oftentimes, a lot of those can kind of coincide with some of my fly fishing gigs. So I just line it up. It's like I go to Coeur d'Alene, then I go to Montana for Fly Fishers International, and then come home, because they're so close together in timing.
Yeah, very cool. And so, what's one of your favorite memories from your caddying career?
Oh, by far winning the Desert Classic. That was insane for me because it was my first year on tour was 2 years ago. And I was so nervous to do it because I was like, I don't even know if I travel well. Like, maybe I'm just a good caddy at Bandon Dunes. Like, maybe I'm not actually a good caddy. I don't know. I have those courses. I literally think I could caddy those courses blind. I have them memorized, So I wasn't sure how I'd do at new courses, not to mention that's like a fast track thing. You go down there, you learn the course that day, you walk the course, figure it out, and the next day you're in practice rounds, and then you're competing that weekend, and then you go off to another course. So I was incredibly nervous, but I had 3 caddy friends that worked down in the desert, and they just were like, you have to come do this. And I was just like, why? And they're like, you just have to. And so, I was honestly terrified. I got paired up with this really awesome girl named Anaya, and her father is actually the longest standing amateur player in this event. He's been doing it for like 40 years. It's insane. But I carried her. She's an incredible ball striker. I think her handicap is honestly the same as mine. It's an 11, but she is a much better ball striker and not a great putt reader. So the combo with us together is pretty deadly. And my very first year on tour, on my very first, my very first tournament, we won the entire tournament 38 under par.
Wow.
So that was insane. Yeah.
Very cool. And, I guess I first met you in the recent article that was in, I think, not the newest, but I guess the issue before Fly Tire magazine. And you talked.
Yes, the summer one.
Yeah, the summer one. And, you talked a little bit about a boyfriend who wouldn't share his fly tying materials with you. But tell me a little bit about what attracted you to fly tying.
This is kind of funny, but it's like, I obviously with my job, I just don't sit still well. I don't do well with doing nothing. I never just sit around and watch TV. I like to sit and watch TV, but I need my hands going. So one thing I used to do when I was much younger is like my mom and my sister, they're pretty girly girl. They're into arts and crafts, and they'd be cross stitching. And so I'm like, okay, I'll cross stitch. And I'm doing it, but I'm like, I hate everything I made. I was like, oh, I made this pillow. Awesome. Somebody take it. I never want to see it again. I hate the way cross stitch looks, And so I'm like, fly tying is like cross stitching, only I actually want to keep and use the product. And that was one of the things with the cross stitch. I'm like, I hate that I have done all these things. I have absolutely nothing to show for it, nor do I want any of it, So the fly tying, that's really, it's like I do that a lot in the evening, just kind of as a decompress. My bench is right in front of the TV, and I just put a movie on and half pay attention to it while I tie something up,
Yeah, very neat. And so, what was the first vise that you bought, and do you remember the first pattern that you tied on it?
Yeah, it's embarrassing to say that I'm still tying on the first vise that I bought because it really needs to be replaced. It is a Renzetti Traveler. That was the guy that I dated. He had a Renzetti Traveler. I liked the vise. It was a good price point, and I still love it. I have been talking about getting a new vise. I don't know when I'm going to do that. Probably won't do it until I can't tie on this anymore. But yeah, I love Renzetti. They don't really have much of a pro program, unfortunately. They promote me a lot on their website, but they just don't really give product away because they're just such a small family-owned business. So I'm not sure if I'll end up, signing with somebody else or staying with them or not, but it's been an incredible vise. And then my first pattern, I actually have on my bench here, and it's always in front of me so that I can remember. It is a hopper. I tied a hopper. It's pretty good. Actually, I'd be embarrassed, now, but I'm pretty sure it would catch fish. And it's not too bad for the first one.
Got it. A foam hopper or a deer hair hopper?
It's a little of both. There's a foam body. Actually, no, I'm looking pretty good for my first one. It's foam body, and then the deer hair is backwards and then wrapped over the head. That's pretty fancy for my first one.
Yeah, bullet head, right?
Yeah.
That is pretty fancy. And you haven't been tying that long and you're already a professional tyer. How long did it take you from being interested in starting to tie to becoming a professional tyer, and how did you become so proficient so quickly?
Technically, it was about 9 months when I got my first sponsorship, and that was with Spirit River, who has since been sold to Hairline Dubbing, and they don't carry a pro program anymore, so I just have a commercial account with Hairline. But Bill Black owns Spirit River. He's another awesome fisherman who lives kind of nearby, and definitely a mentor for sure. Probably should have mentioned him. He just took me in. His manager saw me at a show, and she's like, "We want you." And I was like, "Huh? I don't understand," because I'm just over there. I think it was one of my first shows, maybe my second show. When I did my first show, I didn't really know what to expect. I mean, I had been to some fly shows, but I don't think that it registered. It's like once I was gone from the show, and then 6 months later, somebody had invited me to tie at the first show I was going to tie at. I didn't really remember what each tyer's booth looked like. And in my mind, again, I was so freaked out about doing it because I knew I had no real business being there yet. I was like, I bet I need to go in there looking like I've been here a while. I don't want to look like I'm new. So I go down to the beach and get this driftwood, and I tie up all these samples, and I go, and I must have had like probably 25 patterns on display, and I get there and people all have like one or two patterns. And I'm like, okay, I've overdone it. I've overshot the landing here. But it was a hit, it kind of took off. And I think that was one of the things is my booth was so flashy because I had so much going on with the big steelhead flies and just a lot of color that they're like, no, we want you at the shows. We need like flashy. We like this. So I think that was probably, she saw that and was like, hey, we're going to take you on.
Yeah, very neat. And who are some of the people that influence you as a tyer? I mean, who do you follow, and what other tyers do you like to kind of watch and maybe borrow a little bit from them?
I do. April Voku's probably like my, she's more fishing than tying, but she's like definitely my number one in the industry for so many reasons. One, because, it's like being a woman in a man's world, blah, 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 just can be a little isolating and can be tough at times, and they don't take you seriously, and they don't know what you're doing there, and so she's definitely been a big influence. And, there's a couple on Instagram that I really enjoy. I would say Matt Callie's from Loon Outdoors. I mean, I'm on their pro staff program, and we haven't met in person, but we have, chatted a lot through the internet, and, he's a great guy and ties some awesome stuff up. And then there's another one on Instagram, and his name's Sven Diesel and he just does ridiculous stuff on the vise, ties stuff that makes absolutely no sense. And I love it. It's just kind of that creativity, like, screw it. Who cares? So, those are probably the top ones for me.
Yeah, very neat. And what was kind of the biggest surprise or adjustment for you, kind of shifting from tying for yourself to tying for others?
There is a lot of pressure there, pressure to get it right, or even pressure to get it done. I noticed, I'm not so bad now, but I noticed when I first started, I would kind of like procrastinate a little on the order because I was like, I don't know it's just, people call up and order like 4 dozen flies, and all of a sudden you feel a little bogged down, So, I think that production tying, and I also notice that sometimes I might do a couple wraps and then I stare at the TV for a while, and then I come back and it's like, oh, it took me 30 minutes to tie that fly, right? Because I was just doing it for me. So I actually have a really cool production wheel that Renzetti, they didn't make very many of them, but it's this wheel that you can spin. And so you can do like 3 or 4 flies, you do 3 flies at a time. And that way you can kind of production tie. So in that sense, I definitely do things different where like, I'll tie a dozen partial flies depending on what the elements are, and then go around again and finish the dozen partial flies. That tends to be much faster.
Interesting. So is that wheel like a Lazy Susan that fits around the stem of the vise, or is it separate?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's like a Lazy Susan, and you just stick 3 vise stems in there and you just move it. That's
pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
So I know from doing my research, but not on LinkedIn, that you specialize in tying custom flies, and I was curious about what attracted you to doing custom orders as opposed to becoming a production tyer.
Well, I think a big thing was the price point. I mean, I look at these people that I know that tie for fly shops, and I'm like, you can't make any money. Like, that's sweatshop work. I'm not looking to work in a factory, And I didn't see a way that I could, stamp out hundreds of flies and even make any money after I'd done it, I mean, the fly shops, obviously they have a price point that they need to cover, but I kind of do too. And it was like, I can't get paid for my time doing this. And I think that a lot of that is outsourced overseas because it makes sense because, just with the difference in economy in some of these countries, the fly tyers are getting $1.50 or $2 a fly, and then they're marking it up to $3 or $4 over here. Well, $1.50 over there is like they're loaded. Like if they're making $1.50 off of a fly based on the economy, they're just making so much money. So it really just makes sense to let those people make money and not have us try to struggle to do it here, to be honest. I had heard about this woman. I honestly don't even know her name, but she is apparently a fly tyer in England that is so highly sought after. I guess Dave Matthews and Tom Cruise and all these stars order their flies from her, and she's got over a year waiting list, and she charges quite a bit, but she makes really good money. And I was like, that's the only way I see being able to do it is to sell it more as working art, to, say that I am the only person tying these. I'm not going to outsource anything. And then having said that, I just, I really take time. Like every fly is going to look perfect that I send out. Like if I tie a fly and it doesn't look perfect, it goes in my box. Kind of how it works, and I'll just tie more until they're all perfect. And that has worked out. I tend to have a waiting list, usually only a few months out, but so far it's been, pretty steady. So.
Well, that's pretty cool. And so when you aren't tying for other people, what do you like to tie for yourself?
It has been a struggle to try and get flies in my own box. I feel like a lot of the trips that I've taken, I get there and I'm like, God, the box is kind of empty because I'm tying for other people a lot. This year I did get a lot of that done. And one of the things that I'm just such a maps to hatch person. I have to travel so much for different shows that I oftentimes end up in waters that I've never been in. So I'm down there shaking the trees and turning over the rocks. And I usually bring all my tying stuff with me, and then I go back to the truck, and I usually plan for one afternoon of tying the hatch in the area where I arrived, and then the next few days just fishing those ties.
Very, very cool. And, for us regular tyers, can you give us 2 or 3 tips that you've picked up from your professional tour of duty?
I think that the biggest thing that I have done to make my flies look better is like the amount of wrap can really get carried away. I mean, I think we all have the tendency to want to make sure things are tied down. So it's like, you're putting something on and you're wrapping it 3 or 4 times, and then you're putting it on the other side and wrapping it 3 or 4 times, and then you're tying something on top, and it's like, now that's like too much. So I tend to try, and it's like if I'm, if I know stuff is going on top, and I will only do like 1, maybe 2 wraps, and on each item, because then by the time you're getting to the head, there's like 30, 40, or however many are on there, but then the head's much smaller. And also crowding the head tends to be a problem for a lot of people. I mean, you can even take in a marker and just notching the fly to kind of find a spot where you need to stop, before you get the head on. That's been, because I think it's just people tend to keep going and then they run out of room, and then all of a sudden, got problems.
Yeah, you got a fly that you can't get any tippet through the eye of the hook.
Yeah, it's a nice fly, but you can't fish it. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other tips?
Gosh, I'm trying to think. I think that the other thing that if you have access to is when you're in the store picking out material. That's one thing I'm big about, is I open every package in the store and pull it all out. Like if there's a string of guinea feathers or whatever, I open the package, I spray them out, and I'm looking at them all. You really got to pick through the material in the store, because it's not all the same and it's not all good quality. Like you really have to pick through it to find the good stuff, especially with hair and feathers, I should say. And that the high quality will make a big difference. And then the other thing too is prepping feathers, kind of like skinning the bottoms, or like if I'm palmering marabou, I take the bottoms off, I leave them in these tiny little prepped feathers, where when I'm done wrapping, it's a bear, it's like a bear quill that I'm tying on. And that makes them much, much cleaner.
Got it. And what's one tying tool that you absolutely positively can't live without, and it would surprise us?
It's funny. I got these little scissors from a friend who is a tyer on the East Coast. Well, not quite on the coast, east of Mississippi, I should say. And they are actually eye surgery scissors. But the points on these are so tiny. They're tinier than any microtip scissor you can find, which I shouldn't be saying because I love all my Dr. Slick stuff. But you can't cut a cleaner, like for the tiny little 22, 24, 26 midges, all these tiny, you cannot cut a cleaner, thread with these things. So these are kind of my favorite. Other than that, the Dr. Slick has come out with these new stackers, and they're so heavy. I mean, I can't even use the other stuff I have. I even put up something, it's been a while, on Instagram, weighing out the stackers. That I had like 4 different companies of stackers, and I mean, these things are just incredible.
Very neat. And, you mentioned kind of getting into the fly fishing show game pretty early on in your tying career, and you've kind of become a fixture on the West Coast. And, obviously things are a little bit up in the air this year with COVID, but, what are your plans for the upcoming show season?
Yeah, so, I mean, we still have some shows planned. I don't really know how that's going to go. I'm kind of confused because some of them haven't canceled yet, but I feel like they should, Some of them have been online too. That's a little, I don't know if they've quite got that down yet as far as the platform that they use, but I'm hoping things will return to normal. Otherwise, I've been kind of doing my own little tour. So what I'll do is I'll go to Bend, or I'll go to, I went to Eastern Oregon to some rivers over there, and I'll set up camp in a fly fishing camp where, it's like where everybody there is probably fly fishing. And I usually do this thing where at night I'll either pull out my guitar and play some music, try to lure some people over, or I'll set my bench out and I'll tie in the evening. And it usually draws the crowd in, and they want to start asking questions, and And that's when I'll pull out my TFO rods and show them what's new, and show them what I got from Dr. Slick on my bench. And that's kind of how I spread the word at this point, is just actually going out and fishing and meeting fishermen, and just doing a little, demo tie there. Because I call them road ties. I always tie on the road. And it really kind of gets people interested,
Very neat. In a kind of a pre-COVID world, what shows did you like to go to?
So I go to, I've got a few. There's a couple in Boise, Idaho. I intended to visit that one. There is, we've got several in the area. There's one over on the coast in Oregon. Our biggest one is up in Albany every year. That's a very large show. So I go to that. That's just the Pacific Northwest show. We've got a Portland Tires Rendezvous, which is really cool because it's a very small, select amount of tires, but they're from all over the world. So that one's really cool. And then I tend to go, we have an annual convention in Bozeman, Montana, and that is through Fly Fishers International. So we have week-long conferences, but we also teach classes all week, on the water casting classes, fishing clinics, tying classes. That one's a lot of fun, and it draws in a huge crowd.
Very neat. Is there anything else on the horizon for Sara Jo Flies you want to share with our listeners?
Not that I know of yet. I'm just kind of plucking along. To be honest, when I first started all this, I had no intention of, going professional so quick. In my mind, I was like, maybe if I put a decade into the industry, somebody will want to listen to me 10 years from now, and maybe I won't carry as many bags. My idea was, when I'm older, in my 60s or something, I might not want to carry as many bags. Maybe I'll want to work in the fly fishing industry, but it just took off, and I'm trying to keep up with it, to be honest.
Yeah, very neat. Speaking of keeping up with it, why don't you let folks know the best way to get in touch with you to order flies and to generally kind of follow you on social media and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, I'm really an Instagrammer. So Sara Jo Flies on Instagram, direct message me is probably the best way. I know that my email, sarajoflies@gmail.com, is also on my Instagram profile, so anybody can go and email me there. But that's kind of where I stay. I do have a Facebook page, but I post from Instagram to Facebook. I don't go on there a ton, to be honest. I just can only handle so many platforms. So I would say that's the way to go for sure.
Well, that's awesome. Well, listen, Sara Jo, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me this evening.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Marvin, so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Again, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a review in the podcatcher of your choice. Tight lines, everybody.